Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about accountability. So let's get into it. So the question in question was posted on a video I made a while back. Hi Frederick, very nice idea of creating a rotation for the tech lead hat and teaching everyone all the necessary skills around the project. It seems to foster responsibility, deeper understanding of a bigger picture around the project, mitigates any problems with people going on sick leave, changing jobs or onboarding the project. How do you verify if everyone is actually checking off the tasks as they go instead of, for example, waiting for the end of their turn so it falls on someone else? If no one is complaining and the tasks don't back up in the queue, you assume do you assume that it is working, or are you actively checking the process and have some measure for it? So to back this up a little bit, so the video that I made was basically where people asked me, how do you ensure is creating reliable software hard? And basically I argue that it is difficult if you don't understand what makes software reliable. And I always argue to people that the thing that the software, most software developers think when they think reliable software, we think about testing and things like that, and like good coding practices. What I say is that a system or like a software product is of course software, but it's also the people who own that project and all the things that surround the creation of that system. So if those people are not really well equipped to work with a given system or to maintain it and own it, so to speak, if they're poor owners, then the software will always turn out like shit, because the software is just a manifestation of the skills of the people who are working on it and how well they work. And so the suggestion that I usually make is that you need to build a little bit of accountability into the team. And the suggestion that suggestion that I have is that I call it taking joint responsibility for all that for the common tasks in the team. So you have a rotation, or like I suggest that you have a rotation on a bi-weekly basis or something like that, where you rotate the responsibility of doing common tasks like the tech lead type of thing. You hosting, stand-ups, retros, supporting stakeholders who have questions, or if there are incoming bug reports or things like that. It's not something that you just assign to one individual. You share that responsibility within the group, and you have a on-call, or as I say, a support person who is dedicated to that during a time period. And that goes for everything that is not very specific to that individual. So a front-end developer, of course, doesn't have to go and do back-end work and vice versa, but checking the logs, answering a question about where documentation is, writing some documentation, all that stuff that quote unquote a tech lead would do, or some similar sort of character. Well, that's a shared responsibility. And so here the question then is, so how do I make sure that people are actually doing it and actually reviewing? Because I have reoccurring scheduled things like checking the documentation, making sure that it's up to date, and so forth and so forth. So how do you make sure that people are actually pulling their weight? That is pretty easy actually. So when it comes to documentation, if you want to check if people are actually doing it, it's as simple as creating like a header at the foot of the document. So if you've seen any of my other videos, what I usually tell people is treat your documentation as code. In other words, you just use a markdown file, or I always use a markdown file, and create a master version of whatever documentation you have in the source, like a docs folder at the root of the project or something similar to that. And then write down all the things that as I like to say, I don't really like having a lot of documentation. I try to tailor my documentation to answering questions. In other words, my goal isn't to document every little thing that we do. My goal is that I know that, for example, I need to know what environmental variables to set in my project before I can start up the server. Well, then I write a little guide for here's how you get those, how to set up your environment, for example. Or I know that every week or something like that, someone has to do something that is really arbitrary, like running a specific script in like some batch job or whatever. I write that down. These are the sort of recurring things that most people won't know how to do it, and most people will forget how to do it. So those details I write down. Or if we have external dependencies, who do I talk to if I need to get a hold of people and things like that. These are the things that I write down, and then I put a little footer with a little heading saying something like last reviewed person or someone who's reviewed it, and then I put my name. And then what we do is on a monthly, or like depending on how often it changes, I usually don't do it in the beginning because I start doing it when we see that things are getting out of date. And then during a certain time interval, we simply go and say, all right, so this time it's Frederick, I'm going to review all these documents, and then I'm going to put my name at the end of that document, proving that I have checked it. And that becomes like a pull request, like at any pull request. And that means, make sure that all the docs are right, make sure that the links are working, and then it becomes reviewed, and then someone else reviews it, and we test it. Like literally we do testing and things like that, so that we know that the person who checked it did actually check it. And the best part about this is that if they don't know if this is correct, they're going to learn. Because now the other person who's reviewing it has to review for them, just as we did with code. And so if you have a quality development process, this would be no different. It would be exactly the same thing as if you updated 2 lines in a bunch of configuration files. It's just another task on our board with a pull request associated with it. I usually make sure that I am always involved in those things if I know that for a fact that this is a person who isn't all that versed, like a more junior person or something like that, just because I know that they might not be aware of certain things or so forth and so forth. So I try to help out a little bit extra if I'm the tech lead, of course. And so by just doing that, you make sure that documentation is actually being reviewed properly by the people who have the person who has the responsibility at that given time. And then when it comes to providing support to external stakeholders and things like that, that's also pretty simple. So usually now in remote times, you have a lot of instant messaging type of things. Like I usually create a dedicated team channel, regardless of which team, there's always a team channel, and that is written in the documentation on the first page of my README in the root of the project. And as you can probably imagine, that documentation being in the source, it can also then be exported to other platforms. So if, let's say, you have a bunch of stakeholders who don't really have access to your Git repositories or like whatever repositories you have, that's not a problem. You can export the format to basically any website because it's all markdown. And I always have contact details and things like that on the first page. And so and one of those first thing is a public channel where if someone needs to get a hold of my team, they know how to get a hold of us. There's emails to everybody. There's emails to like a group email. And there's of course if it's Microsoft Teams or Slack or whatever instant messaging system you're using, there's always a way to get a hold of us very, very quickly. And then the only thing I do is that I make the whole team commit to that anything that is not private between you and another individual, highly private, goes into the open channel. Because my argument is that I don't want to make a whole video about that, but it's really useful to keep conversations that revolve around the team or that has anything to do with the team as a whole in that public channel. Because what now happens is that if someone asks a question and the person who is on support doesn't know, then other people can join in and help out. And everybody can track what everybody is saying about the various things, which gives you one part is that it brings a lot more like camaraderie into the group, because I just trust me on this, guys. I have never seen, and that's what Facebook and all these other platforms, they know that really, really well. If your flow is always silent, there's nothing going on, you will lose interest and lose commitment. It is the noise and the posting of messages and discussions and so forth that brings people more closer together. And by just getting people to commit to that, if they go to me, for example, because they know that I'm a little bit faster, or I'm the senior, and I just direct them to the channel. Now the support person can always jump in and help out and all this sort of stuff. It becomes more easy for them to actually be involved. So I'm sort of quote-unquote forcing them to go through the quote-unquote proper channel, and that helps my teammates. And it also brings transparency into the whole process, because now I can see how long does it take for the person who is on the rotation to respond to a person. Do they know how to answer the question? Do I need to help them with some training? Is there something that is unclear? Like you start to, and this is very traceable. And I always argue, people who are really trying their best and try to just follow the directives that have been set and so forth, they only benefit from this. They benefit from keeping things transparent. It's usually the people who are more a little bit lazy, or like sometimes acting maliciously or so forth. They benefit from the isolation, because then it's very hard to figure out if people are doing things that that they're supposed to be doing, or if they're slacking off or whatever they're doing right. So what I want you to take away from this is that if you want to try my technique, it's very simple. As I said, just rotate what shared responsibilities on a regular basis and share that responsibility in the team. Don't just have one person who does everything, because as I've said before, guys, that only leads to one person being indispensable, and if they go on leave or something like that, the whole team just collapses, or like you have a lot of problems. So share the responsibility. Think about it a little bit as strength training. Everybody has to keep their form up a little bit, so that those heavy boxes that big dude or girl who's super strong always takes care of, that you can at least build, that you can do it too. It's not important that it's completely equal for everybody, but you need to be able to lift the thing if it's the case that it's you who has to do it, right? You have to be able to do it. And that form is very easy to maintain if you follow this principle. And if you want to make sure that people are actually doing it, do the thing that I always do. Build transparency and proof into everything you do. In other words, if you have some documents that you want to make sure that people have read it, just follow the I accept principle. There's a bunch of stuff, write your name at the end, it's proof that you have read it, and then it's very easy to verify. It's exactly the same way you do inventory in like a stock, like if you're working in like a logistics firm or something like that, or how bathrooms are being cleaned, like at different restaurants and so forth. You write your name, when did you do it, and who did it. Then and just that act in of itself is enough to make sure that people are usually doing their part, so to speak, and it's very easy to verify. And just that fact, that's an important part. Just the fact that you know that I or your manager so forth can go and check it usually is enough to make people who are usually a little bit I don't really feel like it, or a little bit lazy, they get that incentive, because now, I mean, nobody's gonna kill them over this, but they know that they can be checked, and that is usually enough incentive. And then the other part is, if you want to make sure that those social things are happening, create a team channel, make it super public, and make sure that everybody in the team knows that no, don't just answer in a direct message, or like do things without the team knowing. Make sure that the person who has the rotation is doing it. And even if it means that they have to come to you immediately, make them do it, because they will learn from doing it. But if you always do it for everybody else, nobody else is going to be able to figure out how to do it, and you're going to become this super dependency who can never be sick, or who can't leave for a vacation or things like that. And sure, that might feel nice for some people, but it's not really great for the rest of the team. Have a great day.